Welcome to In All Honesty, the podcast where we get real about life and all the problems that come with it. I'm Michelle Elman, and I'm that friend who we all know is a little bit too honest. You might not come to me when you get back together with your ex, but I'll be there for you when it all goes tits up. Welcome back to In All Honesty, and today we thought we'd do a special Q&A. I get so many voice notes sent in that I felt like I should just get through some of them because the inbox is getting fuller and fuller, and I felt like I was never going to get to the bottom of it, only doing one message per solo episode. And so if you ever want to send me a voice note, you can at inallhonesty@mindsetforlife.co.uk. You can find that on my Instagram, but also I do a call out every now and then on Instagram asking for specific questions. But this is just a diverse array of what's come in the inbox. Let's listen to the first one.
Hi Michelle, thank you for doing these podcasts. I've been really enjoying them and I can't wait to read your new book. My question is regarding surgeries and scars, and I'm hoping that your experiences can help me. I'm currently 6 months pregnant with my first baby, and I've recently found out he has a cleft lip and/or palate, but we won't know how severe until he's born. The cleft team have been really amazing and are preparing me for every scenario. The best case is that he will just need one surgery as a baby, but the worst case, he may need multiple surgeries up until the age of 10. I know this isn't a certainty, but I'm trying to prepare myself mentally to do my best by him. My questions to you are based on your previous experiences as somebody who went through surgeries as a child. I don't mean to compare the two. I know that these surgeries are minor in comparison to yours, but I'm still finding the prospect of my baby going through them quite daunting. So do you have any advice on how I can give the best support to him throughout his surgeries? And how do I make sure he's never ashamed of his scar or his background? At first I was worried about posting photos to social media as I don't want people to say cruel things about him. But now I'm thinking it would be best to be proud from day one because I don't ever want him to think it's something to be ashamed of. What are your thoughts on this? Thank you again for all of your advice.
Oh, what a lovely question. And I'm sorry that you're in such a period of uncertainty of like pregnancy is hard enough, let alone having the uncertainty of how much it's going to affect your baby. First of all, don't worry about comparing it. I don't believe comparison is helpful anyway. And I always get given that caveat when people talk to me about surgeries because mine is quite uncomparable in many ways. I probably shouldn't have survived it. But I don't think there is a comparison. And absolutely, I am quite informed in being able to give you advice. So for context, for those of you who don't know, I've had 15 surgeries before the age of 20, from a brain tumor, a punctured intestine, a brain cyst, a condition called hydrocephalus, obstructed bowels. I'm probably forgetting something. And yeah, so I've had extensive surgeries. It's left me with surgery scars on my stomach. My head is half bald. I have scars on my ankles. I have scars on my chest, which frequently everyone keeps thinking now is a breast cancer scare. So it's in my comment section every day at the moment, and people do comment on it. So I understand the worry around social media. But I think you're right that you have to share your baby, you have to share your child, and protecting them from not getting the comments is rarely the solution. It's more so being able to guide them through getting the comments throughout their life. So the approach within my family, and my family have the best of intentions, was it was actually never addressed. It was never really mentioned. I think from my point of view, or my family's point of view, it was the fact that I survived. The chance of me for surviving was so low that no one really thought about what it was like growing up at that age where kids aren't the kindest, but also kids don't have the language to talk about serious things that go on. And so I never really had a conversation. As a result, that silence made me feel like I was alone in the problem. And actually, I think that's the main thing that I would talk to your son about as he grows, or whether he's preparing himself for surgery and he needs to have one at a later date and he's more conscious of it. Because I did have surgeries when I was like 1 year old, but obviously I don't remember it. I do remember the ones when I was 7. So anything like 7 up, I would be a bit more cautious around the wording that you say around it. But essentially, make space for the conversations. And that might mean bringing up the awkward conversation first. Don't worry about putting that idea in his head. Unfortunately, society will already do that for him. And so actually just asking the question of, do you ever get concerned about the scar on your face? Or have you ever had a negative comment around it? I think if someone had asked me that question when I was younger, it would have opened me up to actually talking about it. And I just didn't. And unfortunately, when you just receive silence around something, what you internalize is shame, that it's something that makes people feel uncomfortable, that you shouldn't talk about it. And so I think the solution is just to have the conversation. And in terms of the surgery itself, unfortunately, there's not a lot that you can prepare for, like the fear, the worry, the anxiety. Often I've thought about how my mum sat through like 24-hour, 48 hours surgeries and like was sat in the waiting room not knowing whether I'd survive. And like I can't give you a lot of comfort in that area. I have spoken to a number of people who, because anytime anyone hears about my surgeries, my family friends or like really distant people I know via my family will be like, you can talk to my daughter. And just the fact that I survived all I did gives parents hope. But I think ultimately just makes space for all the fear. The anger was something I really didn't get given permission around. And I think if you just come from the point of view of like every emotion you feel about it, you are allowed to feel. You are allowed to feel resentment around the fact that your visible difference means you get treated differently in the world. You are allowed to be angry at the fact that your visible difference means that kids might be mean, kids might not want to play with you. And ultimately, it does build a level of resilience where it shouldn't have to happen that way. And kids should be allowed to maintain their innocence as long as possible and not have to be faced with the like real harsh reality of the world. But I think the way you teach them to navigate it is not to sugarcoat it, but be realistic about it. That yes, he is gorgeous, he is wonderful, he is beautiful. And the world has a very narrow vision of what the beauty ideal is. And not sitting in the beauty ideal means that you are likely going to come across people who project their insecurities. When someone is very young, it is cute. There are some like cute ways you can talk about it. I think people were talking about how mine was like a noughts and crosses board or a smiley face or a winky face and all of that. To be honest, none of that really helped me. And I think this is where everyone's very individual in the way they experience surgery and have a relationship with their surgery scars. For me, I just wanted to talk about the fact it was the worst trauma in my life and that I was really angry that I couldn't be playing in the playground with my friends and I was stuck in a hospital bed. And so make space for all of that and also be kind on yourself, because I think whilst you are pregnant, there's not a lot you can do anyway. I understand the temptation to want to be prepared, but I think there is a fine line between that and then worrying about something that you cannot control at this point, and just have the confidence in you as a human, not even just as a mother, but like as a human, that when things arise, you are competent and capable of handling it. And I already know that without knowing you, because the fact you're worrying about this already or even thinking about this at all means that you're a good mother already. And so the fact that your son has you in his life, that's really going to help, because a lot of people don't have support through the surgeries, through the scars that they're left with. So one of the things I'd also say is something that could be helpful is surrounding your kid with people who also have had cleft surgeries, because then they have that joint experience. And especially when something happens in childhood where a lot of kids don't understand, having just one kid in his life who does understand will really benefit him, and is something I would have really wanted when I was younger, because I didn't speak to any of my friends about it. In fact, my best friend from primary school read my memoir about all my surgeries and said she had no clue that any of it had happened. And so get someone who has lived through a similar experience, even if it's an adult, who he has that person, that point of contact, if he wants to have conversations with someone who, like, from a guttural level, really understands it. The next message is about infidelity.
Hey Michelle, not so much a question, but I just thought I'd share my experiences with infidelity. My now husband, we have known each other for quite a long time, and I know his entire dating history, including that he's cheated on people before. So when we got together, we had some conversations around, well, what led to that? How can we prevent it in the future? What was going on? So ultimately, it got to the point that he would cheat on people when he felt that the relationship was failing, and instead of having the conversations about it, he would just find himself an exit strategy. So I got him to promise that, and he agreed, that if he was ever starting to have those feelings, we would have a conversation about it and work through whatever was going on. We're now married, so it seems to have worked out. So yeah, you don't have to include this voice note if you don't want to. I just saw your call out and thought, hey, it's not a question, but it's an experience that you might be able to share. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I think because of my experience, a lot of people think I'm really anti people staying when they find out that someone is a cheater, or that like once a cheater, always a cheater. I don't believe in these things. I think you did all you can do, which is have the conversation. And the funny thing is that in my breakup, one of the first things he said is, well, you know, I've cheated in the past. And I'd asked him about all of his past experiences, and he had never said that he had cheated. Of course, if he'd said he cheated, I would have gone through and like asked a number of questions. And the main questions I would have asked is, what did you learn from it and how are you not going to do it again? In order to answer that question, first of all, you have to be honest about the fact that you cheated, the fact that he actively lied to me and said he'd never cheated on someone. In fact, we'd had multiple conversations around cheating where his friends, or he'd been on a stag do and someone's cheated, and we'd had conversations about like, he had literally used the words that he thought cheating was disgusting and that he was going to tell that person's partner. And I was like, it's not your place. I don't think that's your place, but I do think you should talk to him and encourage him to tell that person. And I think that's where you need to be honest with yourself and actually admit to future parties and admit to future partners that you have cheated. But also you have to know why you've cheated. And that's one of the reasons I didn't stay, is because he had no understanding behind the reasons why he cheated. The fact that your partner was able to spotlight, I wanted to leave and I don't know how to break up. That was a very specific thing that now you have the trigger of it, you can actually find the solution to it. And I think that's one of the main key differences. Ultimately, it's always a risk when you get married. I was talking to a friend who was married the other day and I said to her, do you think you'd ever get divorced? And she was like, you can never say never. I have a really healthy, happy marriage, and I am aware that people change, people make different decisions, and people go through really big life things and become a completely different person afterwards. So I love that you have a positive experience of that. I also think it gives people a lot of hope if they have cheated in the past that they can also change and be in a successful and happy relationship. I have a number of friends who've cheated in the past and now no longer have. And actually, your message reminded me of something my dad said. My dad is 85 years old and has been through a number of relationships, has been married a few times as well. And he was like, cheating happens, but usually it happens at the end. It shouldn't be happening at the beginning. And that was one of the first things he said to me when I called him at 4 a.m. in the morning, the day after I found out. He basically was emphasizing the fact that there is no route down this relationship when he's cheated before you've even got engaged. And I think that is something as well, where there are a lot of people who cheat because they're scared of having a hard conversation. Ultimately, they don't know how to break it to a person. And then cheating becomes this default where the other person does the hard work. And it is cowardly, but it is actually quite fixable. And I think that's where, with my friends who have cheated, it was a very similar scenario. And that's where I do believe cheaters can change. But it starts with self-awareness. It starts with honesty. And I do believe if you have cheated in the past, you should be honest with your future partners, because when he said to me like, oh, I've cheated in the past, I was like, you've actively lied to me about this. Because I remember we played, I call it the red card game, but it's called We Are Not Strangers. You can find them on Instagram. And it's this card game with really deep questions. And one of the questions, he never really wanted to play it with me, but one evening I was like, he was cooking and I pulled out the card game and I pulled a card that said, what was your greatest heartbreak? And I haven't been in a serious relationship before him. So I was like, well, I've not had one. And then I was like, what about yours? And he was like, oh, it was complicated. It was messy. It was on and off. He never said I cheated on her until he cheated on me. And then he was like, well, this is not the first time. And I was like, this is where he hadn't learned. He didn't learn the first time. He wasn't going to learn this time. He lied before. He's going to lie again. And I think in order to tell the difference between cheaters who change and cheaters who don't is self-awareness and honesty and being able to look yourself in the mirror and be able to be like, okay, this is a behavior that needs changing and I'm going to do whatever it takes to not repeat this scenario. So I'm glad you had a positive experience and thank you so much for sharing it. And now we have a voice note on friendship.
Hi Michelle, so my question is about a friendship. Really looking forward to your friendship book, by the way. Yeah, I had this best friend towards the end of secondary school and into college, and after college we went to separate unis and we kind of just faded away from each other, didn't make the effort to keep in contact, and there was no kind of closure there. 10 years later, it's still something I think about a lot, and he crops up in my dreams quite often, and I'm feeling the need to reach out, but we live very separate lives now. I live near Liverpool, he moved down to London, he's got a whole other life there, and yeah, I'm just wondering whether you have any advice in terms of what to do. Should I just let it be and try to work on it from my end and try and let it go, or should I reach out? Because I think I would like to rekindle a friendship, or at the very least, get some kind of closure from it and talk about, like, you know, how it ended and everything, because it wasn't sudden, it was just a slow, gradual end, and neither of us fought for it. But yeah, I do miss him and miss it. So yeah, just wondering whether you have any advice about that. Thank you, and hope you have a nice Christmas.
Thank you so much for that question, and I'm glad you're looking forward to my book as well. As someone who has been reached out by 4 or 5 ex-friends in the last year, I have actually changed my position on this. I think you should, and I think you should pause on it. But if you've been thinking about it for a while, and as you said, it's been 10 years since you've spoken, you clearly have been thinking about it for a while, I would say send the message. But here's the caveat. If you send the message, remove all expectation of a reply. You have to send it with just positive intentions. See it as a gift of like opening that door, but the door might be slammed in your face. All 4 ex-friends who reached out to me in the last year after my breakup took that risk. I could have slammed the door in their face. I didn't. With 3 of them, they were very clear they didn't want to be friends again. But with one of them, she had actually reached out once before, and I said I wasn't ready to talk. I don't think I can have a friendship. And then when she reached out after my breakup, enough time had passed that I was like, actually, I think I would like to go for a lunch. I'm not saying I'm ready to be friends, but I would just like to go for a lunch and talk and heal some wounds. And we had an amazing lunch. We ended up going for yoga 2 days later. So it absolutely can work. And we now see each other. I don't know whether you would label what we are as friends again, but we definitely are in each other's lives to some extent. And I think when enough time has passed, and 10 years is a lot of time, people are different. People come to it more grown up, more mature. There's been enough time that actually, when it's a friendship that's ended with confusion, you can actually have 2 completely different versions of events in your head. I had 2 instances in the last week where I came across childhood friends of ex-friends and was blown away by how different our 2 versions of events were. Like with one of them, my belief is that it was around her boyfriend and the falling out I had with her boyfriend. And in her mind, which was the strangest thing, she thought we stopped being friends because she introduced me at a house party as an ex-housemate, and I had got offended that she didn't introduce me as a friend or a best friend. I honestly have no clue where she got that from. I remember that vaguely being a joke I made when we went to a party together, where she said like, I'm her ex-housemate, and I'd said like, I'm not just your ex-housemate, I'm your friend, your best friend, you're everything. Like, that's why she thought we broke up. That's where I think like it's important to have the conversations, and it's why I'm such an advocate for communication in a friendship breakup, because like at least if you disagree, you're on the same page. Because if she had brought that to me at any point, I'd be like, I was joking, but I also don't remember having a conversation about this or an argument around it. So I'm not sure why you have attributed the ending of our friendship to this moment, and we would have been able to hash it out. So if you're still thinking about it, send the message. Reduce all expectation around it. And I'm really crossing my fingers that it ends up working out well and that you're both in different places. If a new friendship is rekindled, what I will say from a person who, one of my best friends I didn't talk to for 2 years, was a massive blow up fight in our final year of university when we were living together, and then I bumped into her 2 years later, is you have to give each other permission to be different people. Get to know them again, especially when 10 years has passed. Don't assume that you know that person. Get to know them as a new friend. Allow them permission to be a different person, to not be the person you once knew. And in that way, you can start afresh, because ultimately you don't want the same friendship you had with them 10 years ago. You want a brand new friendship. And so in the same way that you should give them grace to be someone different, also communicate that also you've changed and a lot has happened in your life. And when you've rekindled a friendship like that, there will be awkward moments too. There are moments where I mention a guy she doesn't know, and then I'm like, oh, sorry, he was one of the guys I dated within those 2 years. Or something happened within those 2 years and I'm like, oh, just to fill you in, over the last 2 years where we weren't speaking. And it is awkward, but you just have to confront it. And if both of you want that friendship to work that much, you will overcome those awkward moments. So good luck and well done for being brave and having a hard conversation. And the final message is on anger.
Hey Michelle, so I have a question for you about anger and specifically about how to react to it. When I perceive other people as being angry, I feel like I retreat from them because I don't want to become the subject or target of that anger or accidentally cause them any more pain or negativity. But I also feel like this stops me from expressing my own anger and taking part in the discussion. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts. Thanks. With much love, Claire.
Thank you so much for that question. That's a great question. I think a lot of people will relate to it. And I think it's because when someone comes to you with a lot of anger, especially if that's either something you had a lot in childhood or you grew up in a very conflict avoidant family, it comes across as an attack. And so then your brain goes into fight or flight. And when you're in fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and what's the last one is tend and befriend, actually. This is one that's largely towards women where they like befriend the person. This is where you will not vocalize your anger. When you say you retreat, that's your flight kicking in. And so what you need to do is, it's a word you hear very often coming out of my mouth, is boundaries. You can actually say to someone, please don't speak to me like that. Can you lower your voice? I don't like being spoken to in that tone. Can we take a 5-minute break? When you are able to pause and catch your breath, and when you take that pause, do catch your breath, actually breathe in, slow down your breath. Breath is one of the fast ways you can control your state and your mood. And if you're going into fight and flight, one of the ways you can make your body go into parasympathetic nervous system, which is your calm nervous system, is to slow down your breath, slow down your inhales and your exhales. So when you are in fight or flight, you are in sympathetic nervous system, and that's where you're going to feel this sensation to flee. If you are going into tend and befriend and you want to people please and you just don't want that person to be angry at you, that is when you are going to ignore your own anger, your own boundaries, and you are ultimately just going to want the situation to be over with, and that doesn't always lead to productive conversations. So your two tactics is either to put a pause on it and return to it and just say, hey, look, this is getting a bit heated. I need 5 minutes. I'll come back to you. Let yourself calm down. And when you're ready to have the conversation, you can come back to it when it's on your terms, when you've had the time you've needed. And then when it comes to boundaries, you are allowed to have ground rules on how you want to be spoken to. And you're allowed to excuse yourself from conversations that are uncomfortable. And I think the thing is, with anger, it's a healthy emotion, but how some people express it isn't healthy. So just because you're allowed to have your anger doesn't mean you're allowed to raise your voice, doesn't mean you're allowed to yell and scream. All of these things, and if someone's coming at you that way, you are allowed to defend yourself. You are allowed to protect yourself. And we can't go into this people pleaser mode because that's when you're going to let someone steamroll your boundaries. And unfortunately, when it comes to someone being aggressive towards you, if they do it once and you don't set boundaries, they are going to do it again. And you don't deserve to be spoken to that way. And so if you need that extra time to come back to it, and sometimes the time you need is more than 5 minutes. Sometimes it's you taking yourself away from the situation, not really realizing what happened, being a little bit in shock or taken aback, or maybe you did do the people pleaser thing of just trying to calm them down. And then you go to bed that night and you're recycling the conversation in your head. You are also allowed to bring it up the next day and say, hey, you know that conversation we had last night? It wasn't okay and I really need to talk about it. And then go into a conversation around what you want the next conversation to look like, the expectations you have around communication, and also what you aren't going to tolerate moving forward. I hope that helps. Anger is one of those things that I used to be really scared of. I used to have a huge temper myself, which is really ironic given the fact that I hated it whenever anyone was angry with me. But ultimately being able to distance myself from the situation and realize that when someone acts out of anger, it's out of their own programming and their own training. And very rarely it's about what you've done, because even if they are angry at you, that could have been communicated in a completely different way. And the fact that it wasn't is because of the way they communicate, not because of the way you acted. I hope that helps, and thank you so much for the voice note. So something I am learning right now is when I get passionate and excited about something, I run head first into it without actually thinking about the long-term commitment I am putting myself into. So it happened at the beginning of this year, or actually the end of last year, when I finished Bad Friend. I had meetings with my editor, with my agent, was like, I'm doing the next book, I'm going straight into it. And I've already learned this lesson. I went from The Selfish Romantic to How to Say No straight away. I wrote 2 books in 2022 and I released 2 books in 2023, and I told myself I would never do it again. And yet somehow I felt a sort of time pressure to be writing the next book because the topic of the next book is quite timely. And then I had to pause and realize I need a break. I need to rest. I really didn't need a deadline hanging over my head over the Christmas break, which I truly believe is the only time you can fully take time off. And so I took a break after I had had all these meetings and told everyone I was going to submit a proposal before the end of the year, which wasn't realistic in the slightest. So I am learning that I just need to pause, take a breath. Nothing is that urgent, nothing is that important. And if it's the right timing, it will happen. But you don't need to feel like you're in a rush in anything, to be honest. It's not just work stuff, in dating as well. If it's going to happen, it will happen. And you feeling this pressure to rush it is more likely to ruin it, especially in dating, than it is to help the project that you are working on. And this is likely something that I'm going to be working on for a long time because patience is not my strong suit, but I'll keep you updated on whether I have improved in any way. Thank you so much for listening. And if you enjoy this podcast, it would mean the world if you can leave us a review. It really helps our podcast. And if you haven't subscribed or followed along, make sure you do so as well. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back next Tuesday.